This is a Rattle and Hum Sports podcast for Sunday, November 24th, and it's 4 days away from Thanksgiving, but we got one big fat turkey this afternoon. But the Cowboys won the ball game, 24-21. Not quite sure how, but Matthew Postins is here to kind of break it down for us. Matthew, how you doing today?
Hey, fine, Bryan. How are you?
I'm doing good. I think Dr. Frank Jobe needed to be on hand because the officials probably all need Tommy John surgery.
Yeah, it was a penalty-riddled football game, but at least it was an evenly penalty-riddled football game. Each team had 11 penalties. The Cowboys had 85 yards in penalties. The Giants had 81 yards in penalties. So it was one of those strange games where a lot of penalties, but oddly enough, it was called pretty evenly.
Well, one thing right off the bat we've got to say is this is the second ball game where the Cowboys and Tony Romo has led the team down the field on a drive and won the ball game with time running out on the clock. So I guess we can put to rest all this stuff about Romo not being able to come through in the clutch when the game's on the line in the closing seconds of a ball game.
Well, you know, it's interesting. That was actually the 20th come-from-behind victory of his career. And the NFL has a classification for that. What I thought was interesting was that they finally, on that drive, they started getting Dez Bryant the football a lot more than they had on any other drive that I can think of the last 2 or 3 football games. Second, they started finally converting on third down. They were 1 of 8 on third down going into that drive, and they were 3 of 3 on third down on that final drive. And ultimately, that last third down conversion, the catch by Cole Beasley, is what got them within field goal range. And the third thing, was the fact that everybody talks about how Romo's quarterback percentage is so good in the fourth quarter, and it is overall in the fourth quarter. It's like 102. But Fox showed a graphic at the end of the game that showed that his passer rating actually drops to 75 in games where the Cowboys are down 7 points with less than 5 minutes to play. I think that's very interesting. So Romo actually, in truth, overcame a little bad history today in leading the Cowboys from behind today.
Going back to the issue with Dez Bryant, you talked about the fact that they targeted Dez there in that closing drive more than they had earlier in the ball game. He finishes with 9 catches for 102 yards. And I would have to say, Matthew, based on the last drive only, that's the only thing that salvaged what I thought was a pretty bad day by Dez. He had one ball fumbled. He had it stripped. There were at least a couple other times where balls hit him right in the hands, and it was very frustrating. I thought he was almost taken out of the ball game there for a while.
Yeah, he actually ended up with 16 targets, but I think a lot of that came in the second half of the ball game, and I'm not sure if the Cowboys made an adjustment, or if it was an injury that helped. The Giants lost another one of their corners in the second half of that game, and I think that depleted their secondary to a certain degree. And once they lost that second corner, Bryant started getting more opportunities to catch the football. The fumble, that could have gone a lot worse for the Cowboys. First of all, he did not protect the football. And oddly enough, it was the player that was jawing with him earlier in the week, the Will Hill kid from New York, that actually forced that ball loose. They were lucky that it wasn't recovered by the Giants because they would have gotten exceptional field position as a result. But, at the end of the ball game, when they needed to get the football down the field and they needed to get him the ball, he made some good catches and made some good plays. But you're right, it was an up-and-down game for him throughout the day, just as it was an up-and-down game for aspects of the Cowboys' offense. So Travis Frederick had a couple of bad snaps. It never really seemed like anybody else besides Jason Witten and DeMarco Murray got into a rhythm with Tony Romo until Bryant did late in the game. So, I'm sure the weather played a factor in that. There were several drops in this game on both sides. When the weather's cold, it was below freezing to start the game. You have difficulty catching the football, and the football gets real slick. So I think that played a role in it. But Bryan did come through when they needed him, but he nearly made a crippling mistake in this football game.
I want to talk about one thing that was an issue before the ball game started, and that was the decision by Jason Garrett to send Wade Wilson up into the press box with Bill Callahan, put the headset on. He always wears it anyway, but put the headset on and literally send the plays directly from Callahan to Garrett, directly to Romo, in an effort to get more involved in the play calling. What do you know about all of that, and how much of a difference do you think that made today?
Well, that news broke late before the game. There was really no mention of that during the week, and I'm sure part of that was probably by design. I doubt very seriously Jason Garrett woke up Sunday morning and said, hey, you know what? Let's just eliminate the middleman and just have you send the plays to me, and I'll send them to Tony. I'm sure that's something they've been working on for the last week or two since the bye week started. But they probably just kept it under wraps for competitive reasons. To me, I think it actually streamlines the process a little bit, because before it was going from Callahan to Wilson to Romo. Now it's going from Callahan to Garrett to Romo. But you have to think about it. Garrett knows the offense better than Wilson does, because it's really Garrett's offense. The terminology within the offense, Garrett knows it better than Wilson does, and knows it better than Callahan does. So in truth, if there's any translation issue in what Callahan is trying to do on the field, Garrett should be able to translate that very quickly and get that to Romo. I didn't see any noticeable issues in terms of getting the plays in. The Giants had some serious issues actually getting some of their plays in early in the ball game, but I really didn't see the Cowboys having any issues with getting play calls in. They didn't seem to be in the wrong play very often today. So I'd have to say, based on limited knowledge and not knowing that it was going to happen coming into the ball game, I'd have to say it was probably a positive. It didn't really impact things very negatively.
Okay, the other thing, the Cowboys did run the football a little better today than they have in quite some time. It wasn't consistent, but when it was all said and done, you saw, DeMarco Murray with a nice day today. He had over 80 yards rushing. In fact, it was 86 yards. I thought Dunbar made some nice runs today. So I don't know. They didn't really ever put together what you would call a real smooth, consistent drive in this ball game, but they did get some balance.
Yeah, they did get some balance, absolutely. Bryan had a really nice game. This was just the second game this year in which the Cowboys have rushed for 100 yards or more. I think the thing that I thought was going to happen late in this ball game, and you could kind of see it, the Cowboys, we talk about identity with the Cowboys quite often. The Giants have an identity. We know what their identity is, and they played to their identity today. They ran the ball, and even when they weren't having success running the ball, which wasn't very often, they didn't run away from it. You saw the day that Andre Brown had 127 yards rushing on 21 carries. Brandon Jacobs pitched in another 75 yards on 9 carries. That's their identity, and even when things weren't working for them, they didn't stray from that identity. The Cowboys, late in the ball game, some of it was circumstance, but I think you could say at this point their identity is a passing team. You can get good yards out of the running game if you give DeMarco Murray good holes to run through, which the Cowboys did today. But when your identity is that of a pass team, if you're not running the football well, it just makes things a lot harder on Tony Romo and the rest of the offense. And you could see today the fact that they were able to run the ball helped them in a couple of instances. For instance, the second Jason Witten touchdown reception in the second half. They used play action very effectively and sucked a couple of defenders in to open up the middle of the field for Witten so he could make that touchdown catch. You don't have to run it a lot to get play action to work, but you do have to run it, and you do have to be somewhat successful. And I think that's part of the reason at times during this season the Cowboys' play action just has not worked, because nobody respects a team that can barely run at 4 yards carry, and nobody respects a team that runs from the running game the first time things seem to get hard for it.
If I were the Cowboys too, I mean, taking nothing away from the fact that they won the football game, but I think you'd have to send the Giants a thank you card for their play calling. They rushed for over 202 yards and then got completely away from the running game in the second half.
Yeah, that was very odd. I mean, they stuck with it to some degree, but they kind of got caught in that syndrome the Cowboys seem to get caught in when they're down a score. The Cowboys, when they get down a touchdown, they just seem to want to throw the football way too much, because they must feel in their minds that they're farther behind than they think they are. And I think that may have been what happened today with the Giants. They couldn't seem to get over the hump and get over the goal line. You saw what the defense did with the 2 goal-to-go stands in the first half, and I think that really played a factor in terms of what the Giants thought they could do the rest of the football game. The Cowboys did a very good job of keeping them out of the end zone in the first half. They stopped some key runs that I think the Giants thought, were going to get in the end zone, and I think that played a factor in their play calling in the second half, and maybe in their minds, in the mind of their offensive coordinator, Kevin Gilbride, maybe he felt as if they had to throw the football more to get back into the ball game. They made some curious play calls in the second half, just as the Cowboys made some curious play calls in the second half. With a game like this, where the temperature is so low and the wind is up like it usually is in the Meadowlands, you'll usually see a few strange play calls during the contest.
Well, we saw a few, and the amazing thing about it was, first of all, I never would have imagined, based on the performance by the Cowboys 2 weeks ago against the New Orleans Saints, that they would come out in this ball game and have a 21-6 lead midway through the third quarter and look like they were going to just go ahead and pull away in this ball game, which just continues to make me scratch my head. This team, I cannot get any read on what this team is about, because from one week to the next, they do things that defy all logic.
Yeah, you know what? I think what really helped them out today was just the overall health of their defense. The Saints really exposed the fact that this team really doesn't have a lot of depth defensively, and they weren't totally at full strength today, and as the game wore on, they lost Morris Claiborne at corner. But having Jason Hatcher back was a huge boost to them. You saw what he did today. Two sacks, was all over the place. DeMarcus Ware had a nice game. Didn't have a sack, but he was around the quarterback quite a bit. Even the linebackers did a serviceable job, I thought. Bruce Carter was having a great game until he forgot to tackle or touch down that one guy near the goal line, and he got up and scored. But I think the overall health of the defense is what really helped them the most. They executed pretty well. They did what a Monty Kiffin defense is supposed to do in the cover 2. They bent, but they didn't break. Yeah, they gave up 21 points. But in the NFL, if you give up 20, 21 or less points, you're usually pretty happy with that if you're a head coach, because you have to figure your team can score 20 to 25 points a game. And the Cowboys are averaging about 28 points a game. So that keeps you right in the wheelhouse of the Cowboys winning the football game.
Well, and then that doesn't even account for the one huge play. The very first touchdown was a forced fumble that led to a Jeff Heath first quarter touchdown. So the defense got 7, and that's just massive, particularly when you look at the score of this ball game.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are the types of things the Cowboys were doing earlier this year. They were forcing turnovers, and they were converting them into points. I can't recall exactly how long it had been since they did that, but it's been quite some time. It's part of the reason they beat the Giants the first time around, is they were able to convert turnovers. The defense cashed one in, and the offense was able to turn a mistake into a score later on in the football game. So this game, in that respect, kind of fell into that same form of game 1. For some reason this season, the Cowboys seem to do a good job of forcing turnovers against the New York Giants. It's kind of a shame they can't play the Giants again.
Yeah, no kidding. And the other thing, too, I thought was great, Jason Witten getting into the end zone again.
Yeah, you know what? I think that's critical for this offense, because Witten is such an undefendable tight end, and there aren't very many of those in the NFL. Talking about guys like Tony Gonzalez, Antonio Gates, Witten is just impossible to defend because he just runs over safeties and linebackers can't keep up with him. Today he broke his tie with Drew Pearson for 5th all-time in terms of touchdown receptions in Cowboys history, and then he actually tied Frank Clark for 4th all-time in touchdown catches, because he had 2 today. As you look down the stretch of this game, they're going to have more cold weather football games coming down the line. They're going to have more inclement weather coming down the line. And, somebody as sure-handed as Witten comes in handy, because he's like a magnet, kind of like Dez Bryant is a magnet on the outside of the offense. Witten is a magnet to the defense. If nothing else, if Witten is productive going down the middle of the field, you're going to suck in safeties and you're going to suck in linebackers to help open up single coverage for guys like Terrence Williams and Cole Beasley on the outside.
Now, one of the things that we have to talk about big picture-wise in this absolutely psycho, schizophrenic, up-and-down roller coaster season where the Cowboys win one, lose one all year long. The amazing thing about this is they're sitting there at 4-0 in the NFC East now.
Yeah, you know what? And actually, if the season weren't to end today, the Cowboys would win the NFC East, because not only are they 4-0 in the East, they are 1-0 against the Philadelphia Eagles, the team they are now tied with for the lead in the NFC East. The Eagles were off this weekend, so they can't gain any more ground. But these two teams don't play each other till the end of the season. So, it's shaping up for that last game of the season at Cowboys Stadium to be a sort of de facto division championship game, because I got to be honest with you, as up and down as it's been for the Cowboys, and certainly the Eagles are good, but they're not great, I really don't see either one of these teams getting a lot of separation from one another. Sure, the Cowboys have the Raiders at home on Thursday, and that is a game theoretically they should win, and they've been very good in November and early December under Jason Garrett. They still have the Bears game on the road. They still have the Packers coming to town. They still have to go to Washington. It's going to be a tough road, but at least they haven't hurt themselves any more than they could have, I suppose, in this situation. They had opportunities to extend their lead and didn't take advantage of them, but they're still in the race, and I guess that's part of the reason why Jason Garrett will be back in 2014.
And the other thing that better happen next year, one guy that better be back is Dan Bailey.
Oh, Mr. Bailey, all he did today was break the Cowboys' all-time record for most game-winning field goals in a career, and he's only been in the league for 3 years.
Yep.
That's just ridiculous.
And you think about it, I mean, he's got a contract coming up at the end of this season, and if Jerry's going to overpay somebody, it better be this guy.
Yeah, you know what? It's going to be very interesting. I don't think anybody in the organization wants to lose this guy. He's been as automatic as any kicker in Cowboys history. The problem, of course, is the salary cap. They've got to find a way to shed some money in the off season. And, to be honest with you, I think that the kicking game is more valuable than a lot of coaches in the game believe it's valuable. I think some folks believe that you can just plug any kicker in and have them kick field goals or have on the football. There's something to be said for a guy like Bailey, who it doesn't seem to matter what the situation is. 9 times out of 10, he's going to make the kick for you, even in a situation like today where it was a 35-yarder and a stiff wind, and he just split it right down the middle. That kind of reliability is extremely valuable in the NFL, and one would hope that Jerry would find a way to keep this guy. For no other reason, you offer him maybe the offer him the first-round tender, which would be over $1 million for a 1-year contract, and then try to lock him up long-term.
One other guy I got to single out is Jason Hatcher. 2 sacks today, 1 assist. The guy was phenomenal today on the defensive line, disrupting things and staying in Eli Manning's face.
Yeah, you know what? He needs 1 more sack, and he'll be at double digits for the first time in his career. I can't see a scenario in which this guy does not go to the Pro Bowl for the first time this year. And if you're looking ahead big picture-wise and looking down to 2014, this guy's a free agent. And you know what? What he's showing you right now is he's showing you how important the under tackle position is in the cover 2. You saw last 2 weeks ago when Hatcher wasn't in there. There was just no pass rush at all. There was nothing. Hatcher comes back 2 weeks later, and suddenly they have a pass rush. Suddenly they're crashing in the middle of the line of scrimmage. That's how important the under tackle position is, or the one technique is, in the cover 2. Hatcher's going to be 31 at the end of this season. He's been in the league for quite some time. You just saw the Cowboys overpay for Jay Ratliff and just saw that whole situation fall apart. I think one of the big storylines this offseason is whether or not the Cowboys are going to overpay to keep a guy like Jason Hatcher, who, to me, I don't know if he can get any better than he's been this season. You hate to say it. He's playing for another contract. He's playing for one last contract, basically. So I don't know if he'll be back in Dallas next year. But what he is showing you is that the Cowboys need to get serious about finding a young defensive tackle that they can groom to be in that position the next few years. There's some good defensive tackles in college football right now. One of the guys coming down the pipe, I don't think he'll follow the Cowboys in any way, shape, or form, is Aaron Donald, the exceptional defensive tackle at the University of Pittsburgh. He'd be great in the cover 2, but I don't think he'll fall into the 20s where the Cowboys look like they'll be drafting next May. But it shows you the importance of the position, and they stick with the cover two, whether they keep Monty Kiffin or not. They have to have a guy there that can be productive, be explosive, and get to the quarterback consistently.
All right, so we said before the ball game that this was a must-win game for the Cowboys, and somehow they managed to win the ball game. So when we look at it in terms of magnitude in the season, is every ball game a must-win, or was this one bigger than most?
I think every game from here on in is a must-win, and the reason is very simple. There's no margin for error for the Cowboys at this point. There's no margin for error for the Eagles at this point. A wild card team is not going to come out of this division unless the Eagles and the Cowboys both win every single one of their games before their Week 17 matchup. So what you're thinking is you win the division or you don't go to the postseason. And they're both 6-5. I could still see 9 wins winning this division. And if you're talking about must-win games and 5 games left in the season for the Cowboys, they can't afford to lose to a team like an Oakland. They've got to collect the wins against the teams that are under 500, which at this point is Oakland and Washington. And then they've got to hope that they can, get one more somewhere, either against Green Bay or against Philadelphia at home, and get to 9 wins. I mean, I think that's just the way you have to look at it at this point. I think the first team to 9 wins this division.
Well, one of the things that the Cowboys have always traditionally done, and I realize tradition doesn't mean much over the last 20 years when it comes to trends, but one of the things the Cowboys always seem to be very good at doing for the longest time was winning on the Sunday before Thanksgiving and then winning on Thanksgiving Day, and that always seemed to be a pivotal thing for the Cowboys as they made that stretch run. What do you think about their chances this week against the Oakland Raiders on Thursday?
Well, I think they have a very good chance of winning that football game. They've got some momentum now. They didn't get particularly banged up in this game. They did lose Morris Claiborne, but they did lose Dwayne Harris to a hamstring. But outside of that, they didn't lose anybody, in a way that I would think they'd be out for the rest of the season. There's a rumor that Sean Lee might be back Thursday. I'm of the mind that if you can get away without him for another week and a half, I'd go ahead and do it, just so he's ready for that Bears game. But the Raiders are the Raiders. They're not a particularly good football team. They can do some things to you if you're not prepared for it. For instance, the rookie Matt McGloin started today for the Raiders, and he had a serviceable day, but they still ended up losing the game. So a rookie quarterback against a defense that's playing better, that seems to be getting to the quarterback a little bit better. To me, I think that makes it a pivotal point in this football game, because the Raiders do have a good defense, but they have a pretty substandard offense. So I think the Cowboys defense goes into that game, plays a good game. I think they win, and they need to win because that puts them at 7-5 going into their extended 10-day break. They can get everybody healthy that should be able to go for the Bears game, and then they go to Chicago on Monday night. And that becomes a big game, not just for the Cowboys, but for the Bears, because the Bears took a 21-point loss to the Rams today. They're fighting for a divisional title. Everything is so tight in the NFC this year because there's not really, to me, a dominant team in this conference right now. So it's going to be a tight mess going into the final months of the season. Yeah,
and a mess is a good way to describe this game today, except it was a good mess because the Cowboys were able to win the ball game on the final play.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. And, this game could have gone either way, and they managed to find a way to win.
And that's all you got to say about it. Matthew, what's coming up this week on Rattle and Hum Sports?
Well, we'll wrap up this game as quickly as we can and get you ready for the next game because we've only got 4 days between now and Thanksgiving Day. So we'll get you as prepared as we can for the Raiders on Thursday afternoon.
Okay, very good. I just hope the Cowboys get prepared for the Raiders on this Thursday afternoon.
Yeah, it hardly matters how prepared I am.
Exactly. All right, Matthew, thank you very much as always. We're glad to talk to you, and we'll be talking to you on Turkey Day for sure about the Cowboys and the Raiders. Cowboys win this ball game on the final play, 24-21 over the New York Giants. Thank you, Matthew.
All right, thanks, Bryan.
All right, that's Matthew Postins for Rattle and Hum Sports. I'm Bryan Houston. Thanks very much for listening to this Rattle and Hum Sports podcast, and we will talk to you next time.